China deployed 38 distinct combat vehicles during World War II, from German Panzers to captured Japanese tanks you've never heard of. But here's what most documentaries won't tell you. Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist forces and Mao's communist guerrillas both used the same foreign equipment, sometimes against each other. This is the complete Chinese arsenal, every single vehicle, no exceptions. Starting with the tanks that defended the Burma Road. Let's begin with light tanks, the backbone of Chinese armored resistance. Vickers Mark E Type E, Britain's export success story that became China's first modern tank. It featured a 47mm main gun and 13mm of riveted armor, adequate against Japanese machine guns but vulnerable to anti-tank weapons. Powered by an Armstrong Siddeley engine producing 80 horsepower, it reached speeds of 22 miles per hour. With a crew of 3, it weighed 7.4 tons. China purchased 20 units between 1936 and 1937, deploying them in the Battle of Shanghai. They provided critical fire support during urban combat but suffered heavy losses due to limited armor. The survivors were used for training until 1941. Renault FT-17, the French Great War veteran that found new life in China. It mounted a 37mm Putos gun in a fully rotating turret, revolutionary for its time, with 22mm of cast armor protection. A Renault 4-cylinder engine generated 39 horsepower, limiting speed to 4.3 miles per hour. With a two-man crew, it weighed 6.5 tons. China acquired approximately 26 units in the early 1920s through various channels. These obsolete tanks saw action in the Northern Expedition and early anti-Japanese campaigns. By 1937, most were relegated to static defensive positions or scrapped for parts. Carden-Loyd Mark VI, the tiny tankette that became China's reconnaissance workhorse. It carried only a single 7.92mm machine gun with minimal armor protection of just 9mm. Powered by a Ford Model T engine producing 40 horsepower, it could reach 28 miles per hour despite its cramped design. With a crew of 2 lying prone, it weighed only 1.5 tons. China imported 29 units from Britain in 1929. They served primarily as training vehicles and patrol units in the Shanghai and Nanjing regions. Their thin armor made them death traps against Japanese artillery. CV-33 Tankette, Italy's export model that arrived too late to matter. It featured twin 8mm Fiat Ravelli machine guns and 14mm of bolted armor, slightly better than the Carden-Loyd. A Fiat CV-3 engine produced 43 horsepower, achieving speeds of 26 miles per hour. With a crew of 2, it weighed 3.2 tons. China received 20 units in 1936 as part of an Italian arms deal. They saw limited action in the Battle of Taiyuan before mechanical failures sidelined most. The survivors were captured by Japanese forces in 1938. T-26 light tank, Stalin's gift that became China's best armored hope. It mounted a powerful 45mm gun capable of penetrating Japanese tank armor and featured 15mm of welded armor with sloped surfaces. Powered by a GAZ T-26 engine producing 90 horsepower, it reached 19 miles per hour. With a crew of 3, it weighed 9.4 tons. The Soviet Union supplied 82 units between 1937 and 1939 as part of Operation Z military aid. These tanks formed the core of China's 200th Division, the only mechanized unit. They fought at Kunlun Pass in 1939, destroying multiple Japanese Type 95 tanks. Next, medium tanks, the rare heavy hitters. Vickers Medium Mark II, Britain's interwar design that China bought in desperation. It featured a 47mm main gun in a multi-turreted configuration with 8mm of thin armor, barely adequate against small arms. A Armstrong Siddeley V8 engine produced 90 horsepower, allowing 13 miles per hour. With a crew of 5, it weighed 13.7 tons. China purchased 6 units in 1930 for the Central Army. They participated in internal conflicts before World War II but were withdrawn from frontline service by 1938. Their complex design made maintenance impossible without British technicians. Panzer I Ausf A, Hitler's training tank that somehow reached China. It carried only dual 7.92mm MG-13 machine guns with 13mm of thin armor plating. Powered by a Krupp M305 engine producing 57 horsepower, it reached 23 miles per hour. With a crew of 2, it weighed 5.4 tons. China acquired 10 units through covert German military advisors in 1936. They saw combat in the defense of Nanjing but were quickly outmatched by Japanese Type 89 tanks. Most were abandoned during the retreat to Wuhan. on. Moving to armored cars, the cavalry's mechanical replacement, BA-27, the Soviet armored car that patrolled China's northern borders. It mounted a 37mm gun and a coaxial machine gun with 9mm of armor protection. Built on a Ford Model A chassis with a 40-horsepower engine, it reached 34 miles per hour on roads. With a crew of 4, it weighed 4.3 tons. The Soviet Union provided 12 units in 1938 for border security. They operated primarily in Xinjiang province against warlord forces. Their wheeled design limited off-road capability in China's mountainous terrain. BA-3 and BA-6, the upgraded Soviet armored cars that became reconnaissance staples. They featured the same 45mm gun as the T-26 tank with 10mm of welded armor. Powered by a GAZ-AA Truck engine producing 50 horsepower, they reached 43 miles per hour. With a crew of 4, they weighed 5.1 tons. China received 6 BA-3 models and 18 BA-6 models between 1937 and 1939. They served with the 200th Division in Burma and southwest China. Their speed made them ideal for hit-and-run raids against Japanese supply convoys. BA-10, Stalin's final armored car upgrade sent to China. It mounted the proven 45mm gun with improved 15mm armor protection and sloped surfaces. A GAZ-MM engine produced 50 horsepower, maintaining 53 miles per hour top speed. With a crew of 4, it weighed 5.8 tons. The Soviet Union delivered 8 units in 1939 as part of the last aid shipment. They operated in the Battle of South Guangxi, providing mobile fire support. 1 unit survived the war and is preserved in the Beijing Military Museum. Next, self-propelled artillery, the mobile fire support, Su-76, the Soviet tank destroyer that arrived for the final offensive. It featured a 76.2mm ZIS 3-field gun in an open-top fighting compartment with 35mm of frontal armor. Powered by dual GAZ-202 engines producing 140 horsepower combined, it reached 28 miles per hour. With a crew of 4, it weighed 10.6 tons. The Soviet Union provided 24 units in August 1945 during the Manchurian offensive against Japan. They supported the advance into Japanese-occupied territories but arrived too late for Chinese crews to gain combat experience. Most were retained by communist forces after the Civil War. Now, towed artillery, the gods of war. Bofors 37mm anti-tank gun, Sweden's neutral export that became China's tank killer. It fired armor-piercing rounds capable of penetrating 40mm at 500 meters with a semi-automatic breech for rapid fire. The gun weighed only 370 kilograms, allowing two-man teams to reposition quickly. China purchased 300 units between 1935 and 1937. They proved devastatingly effective against Japanese Type 95 and Type 97 tanks in the battles of Shuzhou and Wuhan. Surviving guns remained in service through the Chinese Civil War. Pak-36 anti-tank gun, Germany's door knocker that China bought before the invasion. It featured a 37mm gun firing tungsten core rounds capable of penetrating 31mm of armor at 500 meters. The gun weighed 432 kilograms and required a crew of 5. China acquired 200 units through the German military mission in 1936 and 1937. They saw extensive use in the Battle of Shanghai but quickly became obsolete as Japanese armor improved. By 1940, most were relegated to infantry support roles. French 75mm field gun, the Great War legend that became China's standard artillery. It fired high-explosive shells at a rate of 15 rounds per minute with a maximum range of 8,500 meters. The gun weighed 1,140 kilograms and required a crew of 6. China acquired over 400 units from various sources between 1920 and 1938. They formed the backbone of Chinese artillery throughout the war, supporting every major defensive battle. Their reliability and ease of maintenance made them irreplaceable despite their age. Moving to transport vehicles, the logistical lifeline, GAZ-AA Truck, the Soviet workhorse that supplied China's armies. It featured a simple 4-cylinder engine producing 40 horsepower with a payload capacity of 1.5 tons. Built using Ford Model A components, it reached 43 miles per hour on decent roads. The Soviet Union delivered approximately 500 units between 1937 and 1939. They transported supplies along the Burma Road and evacuated wounded from frontline areas. Their rugged construction allowed Chinese mechanics to keep them running with minimal parts. Dodge WC Series, America's legendary 4x4 that kept China fighting. It featured a 6-cylinder engine producing 92 horsepower with all-wheel drive and a 750 kilogram payload capacity. The vehicle weighed 2.4 tons and could ford streams up to 53 centimeters deep. The United States supplied over 2,000 units through Lend-Lease starting in 1942. They revolutionized Chinese logistics, especially in Burma where roads were nearly non-existent. Chiang Kai-shek personally praised the Dodge Dodge trucks as critical to the Burma campaign. Studebaker US6, the truck that crossed the Himalayas. It mounted a Hercules JXD 6-cylinder engine producing 87 horsepower with 6x6 all-wheel drive and a 2.5-ton payload. The truck weighed 5.1 tons and featured a winch for self-recovery. America delivered approximately 1,000 units via the hump airlift starting in 1943. They carried supplies over the Lido Road into China and served as mobile artillery platforms. Their reliability in extreme conditions earned them legendary status among Chinese drivers. GMC CCKW, the deuce and a half that supplied a nation. It featured a 6-cylinder engine producing 104 horsepower with a 2.5-ton payload capacity and 6x6 drive. The truck weighed 5 tons and could maintain 45 miles per hour. The United States provided over 1,500 units between 1943 and 1945. They transported everything from ammunition to rice across China's damaged infrastructure. Some remained in service with the People's Liberation Army until the 1960s. Next, captured and repurposed vehicles, necessities innovation. Type 95 Hago light tank, the Japanese tank that changed sides. It featured a 37mm Type 94 gun and 12mm of riveted armor, adequate for its weight class. Powered by a Mitsubishi NVD 6120 diesel engine producing 120 horsepower, it reached 28 miles per hour. With a crew of 3, it weighed 7.4 tons. Chinese forces captured at least 15 intact examples during the Battle of Tayerswang in 1938 and subsequent engagements. They repainted them with nationalist markings and used them against their former owners. Captured ammunition was a constant problem, limiting their combat effectiveness. Type 89 Igo medium tank, Japan's standard tank that became a war trophy. It mounted a 57mm Type 90 gun with 17mm of armor protection. A Mitsubishi A6120 VD engine produced 118 horsepower, achieving only 15 miles per hour. With a crew of 4, it weighed 12.8 tons. Chinese forces captured approximately 8 examples between 1937 and 1941. They proved mechanically unreliable in Chinese hands due to lack of spare parts. Most were used as static pillboxes after their engines failed. Type 94 Tankette, the Japanese suicide machine that Chinese forces learned to hate and use. It carried a single 7.7mm machine gun with only 12mm of armor. Powered by a Isuzu DA-10 diesel engine producing 32 horsepower, it reached 25 miles per hour. With a crew of 2, it weighed 3.4 tons. Chinese forces captured dozens of these during various engagements. They used them primarily for rear area patrol and propaganda purposes. Their poor armor made them nearly useless in combat. Type 97 Chiha medium tank, Japan's most advanced tank captured by Chinese forces. It featured a 57mm Type 97 gun and 25mm of welded armor. Powered by a Mitsubishi SA-12200 VD diesel engine producing 170 horsepower, it reached 24 miles per hour. With a crew of 4, it weighed 15 tons. Only 3 examples were captured intact by Chinese forces in the Ichigo offensive of 1944. They were studied extensively and used in propaganda films. None remained operational by war's end due to ammunition shortages. Now, Universal Carriers, Britain's tracked taxi. Universal Carrier Mark I and Mark II, the British tracked vehicle that served everywhere. It featured an open-top design carrying a Bren light machine gun or Boy's anti-tank rifle with 10mm of armor. Powered by a Ford V 8 engine producing 85 horsepower, it reached 30 miles per hour. With a crew of 3 plus cargo space, it weighed 3.7 tons. Britain supplied approximately 200 units to Chinese forces in Burma starting in 1942. They transported infantry across difficult terrain and evacuated wounded under fire. Chinese troops nicknamed them mechanical mules for their reliability. Moving to half-tracks, the hybrid warriors. M3 half-track, America's armored personnel carrier that mechanized Chinese infantry. It featured an open-top design with a .50 caliber machine gun and 12mm of armor protection. Powered by a white 160AX 6-cylinder engine producing 147 horsepower, it reached 45 miles per hour. With a crew of 3 and space for 10 soldiers, it weighed 9.3 tons. The United States provided 50 units to Chinese forces in Burma in 1943 and 1944. They transported elite infantry during Operation Ichigo and protected convoys along the Burma Road. Their versatility made them highly prized by Chinese commanders. Next, Scout Cars, the eyes of the Army. M3A1 Scout Car, America's wheeled reconnaissance vehicle that patrolled China's roads. It featured a .50 caliber machine gun and 2.30 caliber guns with 12mm of armor. Powered by a Hercules JXD 6-cylinder engine producing 110 horsepower, it reached 55 miles per hour. With a crew of 8, it weighed 3.8 7.8 tons. The United States supplied 40 units through Lend-Lease in 1943. They conducted reconnaissance ahead of Chinese columns in Burma. Their four-wheel drive allowed them to navigate muddy jungle trails. Now, amphibious vehicles, the river crossers. LVT for Water Buffalo. The American amphibious tractor that bridged China's rivers. It featured a rear ramp for cargo loading with 12 mm of armor protection. Powered by a Continental W670 radial engine producing 250 horsepower, it reached 20 miles per hour on land and 6 miles per hour in water. With a crew of 3 and capacity for 30 troops, it weighed 18 tons. The United States provided 12 units for potential amphibious operations on the Chinese coast in 1945. Japan surrendered before they saw combat, but they were used for river crossings in the Civil War. Next, motorcycles, the Swift Messengers. Harley-Davidson WLA. The American motorcycle that carried Chinese dispatches. It featured a 45 cubic inch V-twin engine producing 23 horsepower with a top speed of 65 miles per hour. The bike weighed 255 kilograms including military equipment. The United States supplied over 500 units through Lend-Lease. They served as courier bikes for headquarters staff and reconnaissance units. Their reliability in harsh conditions made them favorites among Chinese officers. BMW R75. The German motorcycle with sidecar captured from Japanese forces. It featured a 750 cubic centimeters flat twin engine producing 26 horsepower with driven sidecar wheel for off-road capability. The combination weighed 420 kilograms and reached 58 miles per hour. Chinese forces captured several examples that Japan had purchased from Germany. They used them for command and control in mountainous regions. Their complex maintenance requirements limited their service life. Next, Jeeps, the universal vehicle. Willys MB Jeep. The American 4x4 that became the face of Chinese-American cooperation. It featured a 4-cylinder Go Devil engine producing 60 horsepower with 4-wheel drive. The vehicle weighed 1.1 tons and could carry 360 kilograms. The United States supplied over 4,000 units to Chinese forces between 1942 and 1945. They served in every role imaginable from ambulances to machine gun platforms. Chinese soldiers called them bang bang cars after their exhaust sound. General Stilwell personally used one throughout the Burma campaign. Moving to specialized vehicles, the Unique Solutions. M8 Greyhound armored car. America's 6-wheeled scout that arrived in China's final year. It mounted a 37mm M6 gun in a rotating turret with 19mm of sloped armor. Powered by a Hercules JXD 6-cylinder engine producing 110 horsepower, it reached 56 miles per hour. With a crew of 4, it weighed 7.9 tons. The United States provided 20 units in 1945 for the planned coastal offensive. They saw limited action in the final months but proved highly effective in their reconnaissance role. Some were captured by communist forces and used in the Civil War. M4 Sherman medium tank. The American legend that finally gave China real armor. It featured a 75mm M3 gun with 51mm of frontal armor and sloped hull design. Powered by a Continental R975 radial engine producing 400 horsepower, it reached 24 miles per hour. With a crew of 5, it weighed 30 tons. The United States supplied 20 M4A4 variants to Chinese forces in India for training in 1944. They formed the first provisional tank group that fought in Burma. Chinese crews praised the Sherman's reliability compared to Soviet and British tanks. M3A1 Stuart light tank. The fast American scout tank that led Chinese advances. It mounted a 37mm M6 gun with 44mm of frontal armor. Powered by twin Cadillac V8 engines producing 220 horsepower combined, it reached 36 miles per hour. With a crew of 4, it weighed 15.3 tons. The United States provided 48 units to Chinese forces in Burma in 1944. They spearheaded the advance down the Ledo Road, engaging Japanese positions. Their speed and reliability made them ideal for exploitation operations. M3A3 Stuart light tank. The earlier Stuart variant that trained Chinese tankers. It featured the same 37mm gun with 38mm of frontal armor and riveted construction. A Continental W670 radial engine produced 250 horsepower, achieving 36 miles per hour. With a crew of 4, it weighed 12.9 tons. The United States supplied 12 units for training purposes in India in 1943. They taught Chinese crews American tank doctrine before transitioning to M5A1 models. Most remained in India as training vehicles. Now, self-propelled guns, the mobile artillery. M7 Priest. The American self-propelled howitzer that provided mobile fire support. It mounted a 105mm M2A1 howitzer on AM3 tank chassis with open-topped fighting compartment. Powered by a Continental R975 radial engine producing 375 horsepower, it reached 26 miles per hour. With a crew of 7, it It weighed 22.9 tons. The United States provided 6 units to Chinese forces in Burma in 1944. They supported the advance to Myitkyina with devastating indirect fire. Chinese artillery officers called them mobile fortresses. Finally, prime movers, the artillery haulers. M5 high-speed tractor. The American track tractor that towed China's heavy guns. It featured a fully tracked design with a cargo bed for ammunition and crew. Powered by a Waukesha 6-cylinder engine producing 210 horsepower, it reached 48 miles per hour. The vehicle weighed 13.6 tons and could tow up to 18 tons. The United States supplied 30 units for towing. American supplied 155 mm howitzers. They revolutionized Chinese artillery mobility, allowing repositioning that Japanese forces couldn't match. Their speed allowed Chinese guns to avoid counter-battery fire. So there you have it, all 38 Chinese vehicles. But I know what you're thinking. You missed the Panzer I Ausf A. Actually, China only received Ausf A models. The Ausf A variant was never exported to Asia. But if you want a separate video on Chinese vehicles in the Civil War, drop a military medal in the comments. Also, 89% of you aren't subscribed.